As a reminder, please turn off your cameras and please put your remote on mute because we need to make sure that we have a clear viewing for the video that we will send out later this afternoon. So please go ahead and turn off your cameras and turn yourselves to mute. As a reminder, today's presentation is going to focus on the employment data numbers for August 2020. Any questions not related to the employment data numbers can be sent to media@deo.myflorida.com and we will get back to you as soon as possible. I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne Johnston, our Bureau Chief for Workforce Statistics and Economic Research. She will give the presentation today and then we will take questions afterwards. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. At 10 a.m. this morning, the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity released the August 2020 labor statistics for the state of Florida and its sub-state areas, including all metropolitan statistical areas, counties, and large cities. The data were produced by the Bureau of Workforce Statistics and Economic Research through a federal-state cooperative agreement with the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. And they were collected through a combination of administrative data, employer and household surveys, and statistical modeling techniques. This morning, I will walk you through the details of the data release, starting with the household survey. So just bear with me one moment while I share my screen with you. Okay, as a reminder, the current population survey is used to estimate Florida's unemployment rate, total labor force, and labor force participation rate under the Local Area Unemployment Statistics Program. We also call this LAUS. Since these statistics are based on a survey of households, they capture information about individuals, not jobs, and they are calculated by place of residence, not place of work. Florida's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in August 2020 was 7.4%. This represented 753,000 jobless individuals out of a labor force of 10,138,000. Florida's August 2020 unemployment rate was down 4 percentage points from the revised July 2020 rate and up 4.4 percentage points from the August 2019 rate. Florida's unemployment rate was 1 percentage point lower than the national rate of 8.4%. Florida's labor force grew to 10,138,000 in August 2020. This is down 232,000 from August 2019 level, a decline of 2.2%. In August 2020, Osceola County had the highest unemployment rate with 15.1%, followed by Orange County with 11.6%. Lafayette County had the state's lowest unemployment rate of 3.4%, followed by Liberty County with 4.1%. Job creation data for Florida is derived from the Current Employment Statistics, or CES survey, conducted by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The CES survey collects data from up to 20,000 Florida businesses and establishments each month to measure jobs by industries across the state. Since these statistics are based on a survey of employers, they measure counts of jobs, not individuals, and they capture characteristics of employers such as industry and place of work. The total non-agricultural employment grew to 8,525,100 jobs in August 2020. This was up 57,900 jobs, or 0.7%, from July 2020. This figure is down 456,100 jobs from a year ago. This represents an over-the-year decline of 5.1%. Florida's private sector non-agricultural employment was 7,398,400 jobs in August 2020, up 46,000 jobs, or 0.6%, from July 2020. Total private jobs are down 458,000 jobs from August 2019. This is an over-the-year decline of 5.8%. Now, before I move on to our industry trends, I want to highlight some differences that we noticed with this particular data release. One of the things that really stands out this month, other than the decline in the unemployment rate, is the contrast between the jobs added in the establishment survey and the increase in labor force employment. What we just saw is that Florida added nearly 58,000 jobs over the month, yet we've seen 527,000 individuals go back to work in the same period. That brings us to an important definitional difference between employment from the Establishment Survey and labor force employment from the Local Area Unemployment Statistics Program, or LAUS. So as you can see on this graph, where we see the LAUS employment levels in blue and the current employment statistics employment in green, the labor force employment is typically 11% higher than the CES employment. And this is due to the fact that there are several non-covered categories included in the labor force employment, the largest of which is self-employment. What this really highlights is that, as you can see, the pandemic impacted each series a little bit differently. So if the current employment or the labor force employment is about 11% higher than the CES employment on average, typically, we saw a much larger decline relative in the labor force employment than we saw in the CES employment. And that is largely due to the impact of the pandemic on the self-employed population. You can see in April that the gap closed to about 2 to 4%. And then now we are starting to see those levels reach back to the historical trend. So while it looks like there are significant differences between those two employment levels this month, we are actually seeing the employment levels from each series return to their historic trends. So moving on from that, I did want to highlight what we see in the industry employment numbers. 8 out of 10 major industry sectors in Florida gained jobs over the month. All major industries except government lost jobs over the year. Education and health services gained 21,400 jobs over the month, and this was driven by 10,900 jobs gained in healthcare and social assistance, and 10,500 jobs gained in educational services. Government added 11,900 jobs over the month, and professional and business services added 9,600 jobs over the month. The industries that lost jobs over the month were construction, which lost 2,200 jobs, and information, which lost 1,400 jobs. And finally, look at our local area employment changes. We see the August 2020 seasonally adjusted local area data show that 21 of the 24 metro areas in Florida had an over-the-month job gain. The Jacksonville metro area gained the most jobs with 6,600, and Homosassa Springs grew the fastest with a rate of 1.9%. Other metro areas gaining jobs over the month were Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater with 4,400 jobs, and Cape Coral, Fort Myers with 3,900 jobs. And that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
So as a reminder, please send your questions via the chat and we will moderate that discussion. Questions will be taken today based on the economic data information that Adrian just went over, and any other questions can be sent to media@deo.myflorida.com. So Greg Angel asked, as Floridians begin to exhaust all available benefits, they no longer apply for benefits. Will a growing number of people not applying for benefits affect the calculation to determine the overall unemployment benefit?
So that's a very good question. One thing I didn't mention, in this particular month, we found that the unemployment rate and those labor force statistics were largely driven by the data collected from the household survey. Now, unemployment insurance claims are an input into that data series, but in this particular month, we didn't see it have as much of an impact as the household survey. So moving forward, we will see, an interaction between how people respond to the survey, which is ultimately what tends to drive that number. But the claims numbers can also impact it as well. So that's possible, but to the degree to which that will happen, it's uncertain.
Thank you, Adrian. Jake Stofan asked, July numbers took a hit because of the spike in cases. Is it too early to make a prediction for what we might see in the next report?
So I always shy away from too many predictions, but I will point out a couple of things to be mindful of when you think about the employment numbers and what we can expect from the months in the future. So one thing to be aware of is that both data sets are based on a survey that is conducted during the reference week of the 12th each month. So it's important to understand that because you'll see the numbers are going to be sensitive to events that happen during that period. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is during the month of August, we have seen businesses continue to open. Mitigation efforts have continued to relax and allow businesses to open, and we've also seen schools going back in, and that's going to impact people's ability to go back to work. So those are some of the things to keep in mind as we look to the future for August and September data, which will be released in October.
I'm going to have Adrienne turn her camera on and say that one more time for you guys with video, just so you'll have some footage. Sorry about that. We'll go ahead and go to Jocelyn Howard's question. How many are full-time versus part-time jobs, and how many are going back to jobs that they were furloughed or laid off from?
Great question. Unfortunately, in our current employment statistics program, we do not distinguish between full-time and part-time. So when we look at the jobs created, we don't have that distinction. There are some information available in the household survey data that we can dig into and look at and see how many of those are part-time employees. So that's something that would take a little bit of research, but we would be happy to do. In terms of those who are going back to jobs that they separated from, I think we've talked about that a little bit in the past. We don't have those specific details either. That's not a question that's asked on the survey. However, there are some other data sources out there that are trying to capture that kind of information. They're not part of our official data release, but I would point you to the Census Pulse surveys, which have a lot of details related to those kinds of questions. And we'll do a little bit of research on our end and see if we can find something from there to help answer that question.
Great. I'm going to ask one more time if you guys can turn off your cameras. That will allow there to be better footage for the news folks who are on for us today. So Laura and Farish, if you could please turn off your cameras, that would be super helpful. Caroline Glenn asked, this month, Florida's chief economist, Amy Baker, predicted that state employment would not fall to 6% until April 2023. With the latest numbers, is Florida expected to get to that rate quicker than expected?
So I think it's too early to tell. Those are longer term projections and they encapsulate a lot of different factors. Right now, we're looking at truly how businesses are reopening month to month, and these data are also subject to revision over time. So I think it's a little too early to tell how a month to month change like this is going to compare to a couple years out.
Great. Jake Stofan asked, we've heard about the V-shaped recovery versus a slower recovery. Based on what we've seen these past few months, is it safe to say we're looking at a V-shaped recovery?
So I think kind of like what we just talked about, I think it's a little bit too early to tell. There are a lot of factors that go into this, and businesses are still trying to understand what their long-term impacts are. So I think right now we see rapid gains in job growth, and we see the unemployment rate dropping pretty dramatically over the month, but I wouldn't put too much into a 1 or 2 month trend. It's going to take us a little bit of time before we really know the shape of this recovery.
Vanessa, we can answer your question offline since that's related to reemployment assistance. Steve King asked, is the biggest month to month change in the state's unemployment rate in either direction since the pandemic began?
That is a great question. Off the top of my head, I don't believe it's the biggest change, but we can find that out for you. I think when we increased from March to April, that was a bigger change, but I'll find that out for sure.
So Steve, we'll get back to you on that question. Any final questions? Give everybody just a minute. And is there anyone who would like Adrienne to repeat a question for video? So Caroline Glenn's follow-up question. This is the first time the state's unemployment rate has fallen to single digits since March. Can you discuss the significance of that?
So I think it shows the biggest significance, I think, in that is the labor force growing at the same time. That's really key. That's what I look at when I'm looking at unemployment rate trends, is what is the labor force doing? So that's telling us that people are they're finding jobs, they're going back to work. It may not be the same job. It may be the same job. They may be finding one job where they had two. So there are a couple things there just to be mindful of when you look at these trends, but the key is that people are getting back into the labor market and they're finding those employment opportunities. So that's a positive sign. That's exactly what we hope to see. And it's also in line with what the rest of the country is experiencing, although we are at a lower rate at this point.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you guys found that this was helpful when we explain the questions. And if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to call us or email us at media@deo.myflorida.com. And I'm sorry, I see Caroline's question now. Are there any particular openings that affected these numbers, bars, theme parks, etc.?
So these statistics reflect the activities that happened in August. And so we know that, like I mentioned earlier, that schools were starting to open back up. Even if they were moving to virtual at the time, they still were starting to open back up and prepare for activities of bringing students back. And so I think that that's a significant factor that would have contributed to this, largely because that opened opportunities for parents to go back to work as well. So that's probably the most significant single event to point to. But overall, I think it's a sign, since we're seeing that job gains were happening across almost all industries, that this is just an opening back up of economic activity.
Thank you, Adrienne, and thank you to everyone for joining us. We will be posting this video on our website later today as soon as we can get it recorded and uploaded. So please be sure to check floridajobs.org and our press release page. The video will be posted on today's press release link there. If you have any other questions, please contact us at media@deo.myflorida.com. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful weekend.